Star Citizen is an immersive first-person space sim unlike anything you've ever... Okay, hold on. It's not that deep. Star Citizen's certainly a unique game, but instead of giving you an ambiguous marketing pitch kind of like their video a couple weeks ago, we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into what actually makes the game the game. Because while it's mostly known for its long development cycle, its ardent fan base, and its ship sales, and its ship sale whales, there's actually a lot going on here, and I've spent a lot of time reading the design documents, playing the actual game, and covering it, so I figured I could give you about an 18-minute pitch on what the game kind of is right now in 2025. And if you generally want to learn more about the game, I like to think this is a pretty decent place to do so. Hopefully you feel the same by the end of the video and consider checking it out again. Otherwise, here is what Star Citizen is in 2025. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. Let's get one thing straight before we get started, because I already know you're seeing it in the comments. Star Citizen is an alpha state space MMO project that has really only recently started showing more direction and is suffering from quite a few significant bugs and generally unstable performance. While nothing plays like the trailers, this game can have some genuinely janky moments that will catch you completely off guard if you go into it expecting a completed game. Just a heads up. This is due to years of neglect in favor of Squadron 42, a focus on building out core tech before focusing on eliminating deeply rooted bugs, and the excuse that the game is still in alpha. We're finally on our way to getting past all these problems. I'll point you towards my video last week to learn more about that, but that's the fact of it. Star Citizen is still, yes, at almost 12 years from being announced, not a stable experience, not offering a full game progression, and still focused largely on testing. And somehow it's still unmatched in its offerings. Let's talk about what those are. Each game instance is hosted for 500 to 600 players per shard right now. Generally, there are about 10 servers covering each shard. 2 star systems that combined are pretty big. Like, I asked ChatGPT to calculate the area based on the AU diameters we know in-game, and it came out to 2.14 septillion square meters, or 2,140 trillion square meters. Chatty told me we would be informing you of how thick the system is. And like a real one, said smash that like button faster than a Cutlass Black jumps into Quantum. No, but really. So it is a big game, and while not completely filled just yet, what is filling it is pretty interesting. I mentioned earlier that there are 10 servers per shard. What this means is that in each star system, the game is split up into servers that handle everything in their area, while informing every other server everywhere else in the game of what's happening in its dedicated space. It's a complicated system, and on top of that, it tracks every object in the game into various levels, makes them persist over time. So if you crash your spaceship somewhere, another player can come across it, find the loot on board, and salvage the hull. All of this is done without a single loading screen or animation. If you wanted to travel from your bed on an outpost on some moon orbiting around Microtech to the ship factories in the floating city of Orison on the planet Crusader, the only time you would ever lose control of your character is when you sit down in your pilot seat. This is actually a pretty important detail. This idea of fidelity and immersion and just having your player fully existent in the space runs deep in Star Citizen, to its success and detriment. It's not always realistic. I think that ship sailed well before the gravity guns, but it tries to run on rules and make you pay for not heeding those rules. Even then, they do still take liberties. Along with the idea of living in an immersive world also comes one of choice and consequence. The game itself is basically full loot. If you load your ship up with supplies, food, weapons, ammo, a vehicle, and even a little cargo for a voyage, and then you accidentally crash into the space station as you fly from planet to the orbital depot, well, that stuff is gone. Well, you might be able to find it scattered around in space, and everyone will really appreciate the additional load you just put on the server with that, but you're basically starting over when you respawn. Of course, with all the stuff you have stored in your cache. And currently the alpha is actually pretty good at finding many excuses to kill you for reasons you simply can't control or understand, and it can be incredibly annoying and frustrating. Sometimes CIG will take temporary concessions to make things a little bit easier, like allowing us to spawn in our hangar, but that immersion factor is what brings a lot of players to the game, flying from location to location, walking around on the ground while watching others fly around, running industrial operations with dozens of people working together to complete a larger task with mech suits, spaceships, and hand tools, flying through the clouds on the way to your next ground assault as your co-pilot belts out the worst shanty you've ever heard, or even just finding a spot on your favorite planet where the sun never sets, and hanging out with your friends. And where anything is possible, everything is possible. While there is an unmonitored low-security star system in the game now called Pyro, anywhere and everywhere outside of protected zones, the safety is off for all weapons. Now, this is a complicated topic, but I'll explain it like this. Eventually, security is going to be so prolific and OP that most sane people will be deterred from committing crimes in highly monitored space. In addition, any base you build in high security areas is basically invulnerable. For those that do commit those crimes, we also will have bounty hunters to track them down for a good piece of money. And even in unmonitored space like Pyro, third-party factions are going to be enforcing their own rules and ways, just to still keep things, normal. But for now, Star Citizen is pretty open to combat, and it can be really annoying. It's not as common as people make it out to be at times, but it will serve you well to learn where all the dangerous places in the game are and stay away from them, because as of right now, the game doesn't really have your back. The general format that all these interactions will take place is not one that's wildly uncommon from my knowledge when it comes to MMOs. It's a mix of the traditional mission and quest-oriented theme park style MMOs and the more open sandbox style MMOs. This is done through the use of a single shared environment for everybody on the shard, as well as close-off instanced areas around the map. Essentially, the game is envisioned to allow all of the planets and moons, star systems, cities, outposts, and everything in between to persist in an environment that can allow for small instanced sections of various privacy. Some instances, like hangars and habs, will allow for transit of any player that you personally invite. Dungeon crawling areas like the sewers of the planet-scale metropolis ArcCorp will be the same. But then there may be other instanced areas, or even those that are just distinctly closed off from the rest of the world. These are areas that anybody can enter or exit at any time. An example of this are the new contested zones. Think the Division Dark Zones, but with more possible players and in broken down space stations. A pretty exciting place for people who want to get into FPS gameplay, but also an example of how Star Citizen might start to package more areas in the game to feature more defined types of gameplay. This design is actually completely different from the original concept and is a large part of why the game has taken so long. The original game was meant to just be pockets of disconnected game areas in planetary orbit, in between planets, and on planetary surfaces. This would have been reminiscent to how a game like Starfield functions, or even Star Wars Outlaws, where you would load into instances whether you are on a planet, in orbit of that planet, or in between planets in travel. And while this would have been perfectly acceptable, obviously the game expanded to try and go much larger in scope. This hybrid solution will continue in tandem with server meshing to allow for what feels like a pretty seamless open world where all the points of interest and actions that take place at them affect the overall economy. But that's not what the game is right now. This is just the underlying design of the game, a lot of which is not yet functional, much of which is, and even more so that I actually didn't even get to get into during this talk. If you want to truly deep dive on what makes Star Citizen, I have a playlist of that on my channel called Suggested Watching that I'll link down below for you. But how about we take a look at the most in-depth game loops that Star Citizen offers and the gameplay you can actually take part in Star Citizen. Before we continue, I want to take a second to thank the sponsors of this video, y'all. Yeah, we haven't really taken sponsors on our YouTube videos yet. We've been 100% supported by you, basically. But as a thanks, we like to publish exclusive timed videos every month, live access to our podcasts, and every 10th leap year, I send a picture of my feet. So if you'd like to help support the channel, first 10 new signups get spared the feet pics. Now, Star Citizen gameplay. These are your professions or your career paths. As an alpha in development, they are all pretty different in terms of depth, provide different amounts of money at different times, and will undoubtedly change, possibly even by the time you've watched this video. And throughout all this, just keep in mind, I actually have my own organization in-game, and we do all kinds of stuff from mining to taking over outposts in Pyro, to salvage, to combat, to just hanging out in the verse. It's a great group of people, and we're always welcoming. Sign up down below or hit up the website if you'd like to join. Alright, now, first up is mining, which ranges in usefulness in many games, from single-click to mine resources, to automated mining to build bases, to dig up the ground and make new tunnels. Extracting goods from resource pools is pretty hands-on in Star Citizen. You have different forms in ships, vehicles, and FPS mining, and many different tools and variables that change that experience in each one. You have different locations to search, certain moons and asteroid belts that offer particular resources, and the easy ability to do it all solo or join some friends. You can also refine your goods and sell them for a higher price by going to certain space stations that have better margins on their refining. But the economy in Star Citizen is still so bare bones and crafting doesn't yet exist, so you'll mainly mine for profit. This means most folks focus on a few resources, and the otherwise exciting depth of the profession gets lost in the monotony for many, for now. In the future, we'll have the ability to passively extract resources from planets and ship them off to other players for crafting or profit as well. But that whole crafting system is looking like it's probably not going to be in the game for at least another several months. Salvage is similar to mining but different. It's not as developed, but actually does let you take some missions to gain some reputation from factions. But without the underlying crafting system I just mentioned, the complexity of Salvage is also lost. Just like with mining, you'll have ship and FPS options for the gameplay. You can scrape the hull off of armored panels or shipwrecks that you find around the star system. You can jump to various locations, scan around for signatures, hone in on your target, and collect material for money. You can also disintegrate the hull to get different material, but this whole process is stunted by the fact that physical damage and deformation isn't yet in the game, and therefore crunching up the hull has been replaced by a pretty boring, simple button press to do quite a bit of work. But some people enjoy Salvage for this reason. It offers the most calming method of making money in the game that acts as a bit of like a power washing simulator in space. And more recently, the ability to actually strip the components out of the ships, the quantum drive power supply and shield components, and throw them into your own cargo hold and sell them for a ton of credits has become a reality. This was a big change this game was waiting for, and while it's not true with every ship you'll find, we're getting there. So there is some growing complexity to this gameplay. You'll also get different vistas to see while you travel, and different jobs with different priorities, which can satisfy certain types of players. But just like mining, the wrecks are missing their specific material assignments like steel, iron, and titanium, the components that each ship was made from. So there's not a great market for looking for a specific material and then trying to sell that in mass. Cargo hauling and trading, of course, suffer from a lackluster economy as well, but it's actually a pretty novel experience. Of course, you'll be visiting different planets, moons, and space stations to find different pricing on various objects to buy and sell, but you also get the choice of manually loading the boxes into your ship yourself or with fellow crew. If that's not your style, major locations will load and unload the cargo for you for a fee. This is that choice and consequence bit coming back in. Different ships will store their cargo differently, or be better geared for lower capacity trips. It'll be up to you to decide how you want to do it and what's most important. Speed through external storage, protection through an internal cargo bay, or the highest capacity with a true space truck. You can progress through reputation in this career path and find unique opportunities to ship freight for companies without putting your own money at risk. And as the game progresses, more types of cargo are meant to highlight more types of ships. Combat is honestly pretty straightforward. You get the choice of ship or FPS combat at the moment, with vehicles being useful at times but not necessary. You can take part in spaceship boarding parties, underground bunker assaults, factory raids, and outpost excursions across both the Stanton and Pyro systems. These are supported by missions, reputation, and a pretty wide variety of firearms and environments, including Zero-G. If you're more the ship type, you can take bounties that are either NPCs or players. But it's basically just finding and killing marked targets. It's a basic gameplay, but it pays well, and you can progress through the ranks to eventually take on a full Idris carrier with escorts. It's basically a whole battle between you, some friends, and a bunch of NPCs. It can be a really cool reward for getting through the progression tree, and a good look at some of the larger scale gameplay this game is going to offer. There are also ship escort missions and FPS bounties in caves around the verse. There's a lot left to come in the realm of combat, even in the next couple updates, but that's the story at the time of publishing. Racing is not the first thing you'd think of in a space-based MMO, but both ship and ground racing flourish in Star Citizen through pre-made missions around the universe, player-run events like the Daymar Rally, and even closed courses in Arena Commander mode. This is sort of private servers, traditional arena-style gameplay mode we'll talk about later, But you'll find that the racing community is actually really vibrant and enthusiastic in Star Citizen, and while the experience itself is changing quite a bit with the flight model, you'll still find plenty of support, friends, and consistent gameplay. Besides these loops, there are other choices with various levels of things to do. Be a medic and help groups through FPS missions, take part in some investigation missions for a lower pace, or just fly around and enjoy the sights. There is, of course, also Piracy. As this game is fully interactive anywhere you go, players do have the ability to pirate one another, extort haulers for a percentage of their haul, murder individuals for money, smuggle drugs, and steal from others. Much of this is possible in pre-made missions and in the Sandbox environment. While it can be a good time and is completely warranted, there currently aren't NPC haulers and a massive lack of security in the game, so it's all player interaction at the moment, which many don't like and leads to an outsized portion of interactions being less than ideal. But I will say this, while piracy is a valid part of the game that absolutely should happen, pirates should also understand that people aren't gonna like them or be happy about them per se, just accepting that it is a part of living in Star Citizen. So just be wary. If you're gonna ruin people's days, even if it is for a profitable cause, it'll probably end up following you in the community. Either way, the lopsided situation surrounding piracy is exacerbated by the lack of robust scanning tools, unintuitive UI design in the ships, a lack of messaging to the players of what is even going on, a broken VoIP system, and just not enough consequences. It's not constantly happening, but until these things are figured out, the experience can be a bit rough for new players. To be honest, this is only a brief look at the game and the project as a whole. Besides Star Citizen's persistent universe, there's also that Arena Commander mode I talked about. You can play in a closed or open server in ship, or FPS deathmatch, racing, and other game types. There's a game mode that basically plays like gun game from Call of Duty that I really enjoy. You can also just jump in for a free fly to learn about the ships without any pressure. There's also Squadron 42, the main reason for Star Citizen's long development. This cinematic first-person action adventure is scheduled to release in 2026, so it's right on the tail end of taking most of the resources from Star Citizen, and hopefully we can see some more of those make a bigger difference in Star Citizen soon. The company itself, CIG, is also worth note, but that's another topic for another video. The community is also a big part of the development, and while many just choose to play the game and spend their time doing other things, there's an absolutely enormous amount of interaction potential for such a small community. Organizations, unique clubs, contests to get involved in, monthly events, Discord servers to join, and plenty of drama. But again, these are all for other videos. I wanted to give you a top-down look at some of the core principles and gameplay styles of Star Citizen at the moment, with some looks at the future. If you want to know more about what it'll eventually be, check out this video in the corner I've also linked down below, or go check that playlist I mentioned earlier. Remember to check out my orggii.app if you're looking for a good group of people to play in whatever gameplay style you're looking for, and consider dropping by my streams to chat live about the game and ask questions. Either way, thanks for watching yet another long video. I said I wasn't going to do this again. I hope you learned something new in this one, and I'll catch you in the next.